you've been tricked, not by people, not by fate, by pain itself. Pain told you it was real. It told you that what they said defined you, that what they did damaged you, that what you lost left you broken. And you believed it, because no one ever taught you to question your suffering. You were trained to feel the ache and assume it meant something about you, that you were weak, that you were unsafe, that you were less than the ones who walked away clean. But what if pain was just a messenger? What if every betrayal, every silence, every rejection you swore was about you was never about you? What if the real wound was older? What if the reason you're so easily pierced is because there's something already broken inside you, and the world is just touching it? You keep trying to protect yourself from the outer world, trying to grow thicker skin, trying to care less, trying to pretend you're untouchable. But here's the truth you don't want to face. You're not suffering because of what's happening out there. You're suffering because of what's still unhealed in here. You're still flinching from a memory you never named, still shrinking from a voice you internalized years ago, still performing for people who stopped watching long ago. And the worst part? You've convinced yourself this is strength, that stoicism is power, that silence is maturity, that pretending not to care is wisdom. But it's not power, it's paralysis. Because real power doesn't hide from pain. It meets it, invites it, listens to it like Jung said, like a guest at your table. But you're still fighting a war against your own soul. And you're losing because you're using shame as a shield. You're mistaking control for healing. You're building walls where you were meant to build depth. So let me ask you directly, how long will you let unhealed pain define your reality? How long will you let old wounds decide your future? How long will you mistake numbness for evolution? Because nothing outside of you will ever hurt you again. Once you finally turn and face what's been echoing inside. And that's where we go next. Not forward, not higher, but inward. Where the war really began, where the shadow still waits, where the truth still lives. Look closer, not at the pain, but at the structure you've built around it. You call it discipline. You call it strength. You call it being emotionally intelligent. But it's not intelligence. It's armor, a system designed to manage the ache instead of dissolving it. You think that if you say the right things, keep the peace, stay calm, smile on cue, you'll finally stop being hurt. You think emotional control is protection. That if you're smart enough, kind enough, healed enough, no one will betray you. No one will leave. No one will disappoint you. But here's the truth. Control is the most elegant lie your ego ever told you. Because no matter how careful you are, people will still misunderstand you. They will still walk away. They will still speak in daggers when you were hoping for softness. And you'll collapse, because all your strength was built on sand. You've spent your life preparing for pain, but never learning how to feel it. You've mastered crisis management, but you've never once sat still inside your own heartbreak without trying to fix it. Because you were taught that suffering is weakness, that emotions are dangerous, that power means never breaking. But what if Jung was right? What if the real danger is repression? What if the things you've tried so hard to suppress are the exact keys to your power? You want to be untouchable, but the way there isn't through tighter control. It's through deeper surrender. Because the moment you stop trying to avoid the storm, you realize it was never outside you, it was always inside. And your need for control was never strength. It was fear, dressed as strategy. You don't need better armor, you need better truth. The kind that says, yes, I can be hurt. Yes, I have bled. Yes, I have lost. But none of it owns me anymore. Because I no longer build my identity around pain avoidance. I build it around truth embodiment. From that place, the world may still burn, but it will never burn you the same way again. You think the pain is coming from them, the betrayal, the silence, the rejection, the disrespect. You think they are the reason your chest tightens, that they are the reason you can't sleep, that if they hadn't done what they did, you'd finally be okay. But what if none of that is true? What if the reason you're bleeding is because there's still a wound wide open inside you, and all they did was touch it? Because here's the secret Jung was trying to tell you. Nothing ever hurts unless it hits something already alive in your unconscious. You're not reacting to the moment. You're reacting to the memory. The old one. The one you buried under, "I'm fine." The one you dismissed as not a big deal. The one that grew teeth in the dark. That's why one person's criticism destroys you. while another walks away unaffected, because they weren't talking to the same internal world. And your world? It's still ruled by ghosts, by voices that told you love must be earned, by moments where your needs were too loud, too much, too inconvenient, by times you were abandoned for telling the truth. So now you shapeshift for approval and call it being kind. But here's the truth no one's dared say to your face. You're not being hurt, you're being exposed. Every trigger is a mirror. And the reflection? It's the part of you still haven't claimed. You don't want to hear this, because it's easier to blame, easier to say, they hurt me, easier to believe you're a victim of circumstance. But if you stay in that story, you never reclaim your power. You stay fragile, you stay braced, you stay at the mercy of someone else's tone of voice, and you'll spend your life waiting for people to stop touching your bruises, instead of asking why they're still bruises in the first place. The mirror is not your enemy, it's your invitation. Because the moment you stop reacting and start listening, you'll hear what your unconscious has been trying to say all along. This isn't about them, this is about me, and it's time I finally come home. You've done it for years. Smiled through the ache, laughed when you wanted to scream, nodded when your soul said no, acted unbothered, even when you were falling apart. And somewhere along the way, you decided that this was power. That if you could just stop reacting, if you could master the poker face, outgrow the tears, detach from needing anyone, then no one could hurt you again. But here's the lie. That's not strength, that's suppression. And suppressed pain doesn't die. It evolves into tension you can't explain, into outbursts you can't control, into emptiness you can't outrun. You've mistaken your emotional shutdown for spiritual growth. But let's tell the truth. You didn't become untouchable. You became unreachable. You didn't stop caring. You stopped connecting. You didn't grow stronger. You just grew colder. Because no one ever showed you how to feel safely. You thought numbing was healing. You thought indifference was wisdom. You thought being above it all meant you had evolved. But Jung would say otherwise. Because he knew that every shadow you avoid, every emotion you silence, becomes a force that rules you from the dark. That's why your voice shakes when you speak your truth. Why your chest closes when someone sees too much. Why love terrifies you more than loneliness ever did. You built armor to protect yourself, but now you're trapped inside it. You wear silence like a badge of honor. You wear self-reliance like a crown. But deep down, you still ache for someone to say, I see you. You don't have to hold it all alone. Here's the paradox. You become untouchable only when you stop trying to be. Because real power isn't icy, it's embodied. It's the person who can feel fully and still remain rooted. The one who doesn't collapse in heartbreak, but also doesn't run from it. The one who doesn't need to shout, I'm healed. Because their presence speaks for itself. That's your next evolution. Not becoming harder, becoming whole. Not pretending nothing hurts, integrating what once did until it loses its grip on your identity. Because then, you don't need armor. You are the truth. And the truth cannot be touched. You say you want peace. You say you're tired of hurting, tired of repeating patterns, tired of attracting the same wounds in different costumes. But you're lying to yourself. Because there's still a part of you, a very old part, that needs the pain. The part that was formed in chaos. The part that only feels real when something is breaking. The part that still believes love must be earned and safety must be sacrificed. And until you face that part, you will keep bleeding. Not because you're weak, but because your ego still thinks pain is proof of importance. Your suffering has become your story. You don't just carry wounds, you identify with them. They've become your compass, your currency, your camouflage in a world that doesn't know how to hold real emotion. You say you want transformation, but you're still addicted to familiarity. And what's more familiar than pain? Here's the truth. You still hurt because you're at war with yourself. One part of you wants freedom. The other part only trusts the cage. One part wants love. The other sabotages it the moment it gets too close. One part is ready to rise. The other is still terrified of being seen. This isn't confusion. This is contradiction. And contradiction is what keeps your nervous system wired for chaos. You say you want ease, but ease feels suspicious. You say you want clarity, but clarity would expose the lie you've been living. Because if you were truly free, who would you be without the pain? Without the ache that gave you identity? Without the struggle you used to feel special? without the suffering that made you feel alive? Most people don't want healing. They want better managed suffering. But that's not what this path offers. This path, the one Jung pointed to, requires death, not your body, your ego, the persona you've constructed, the mask that says, "I'm fine," the identity that made you feel safe even while it kept you small. You can't take that mask with you into liberation. You have to burn it. Because only when the part of you that depends on pain dies, can the part of you that was born for peace finally breathe. So the real question is, are you willing to stop hurting? Not just in your mind, in your being. Because you can't become whole while still pledging loyalty to your wounds. There comes a moment, and maybe this is yours, when the mask no longer fits, when the performance collapses, when even your pain stops making sense. You try to cry, but nothing comes. You try to reach, but no one answers. You try to rise, but the motivation has vanished. And for the first time, you're not breaking, you're unraveling. This is the void. The terrifying sacred in-between, where everything familiar has fallen away, but nothing new has arrived. No clarity, no relief, no blueprint, just silence. And if you're here, you've probably asked yourself, did I go too far? Did I ruin everything? Did I just lose myself for nothing? But here's what no one tells you. This emptiness is not your failure, it's your initiation. Jung called it the fertile chaos, the psychological death that must precede any true rebirth. Because real transformation doesn't come wrapped in clarity, it comes wrapped in collapse. This is where the ego dissolves, where the strategies stop working, where the old stories no longer save you, and nothing is left but breath and presence and raw becoming. But it's in this darkness that your soul does its real work. It rewires, it repairs, it reorganizes your entire inner architecture around something true for the first time. But here's the trap. You'll want to run. You'll crave the noise again, the drama, the identity, even the pain. Because silence is scary when your worth has always come from movement. Stillness feels like death when the only version of you you've ever known was built for survival. So most people go back to the chase, back to the chaos, back to the role they said they'd never play again. But if you stay, if you sit in this void without begging it to end, if you stop trying to become and simply be, something miraculous happens. You start to remember who you were before you were told who to be. Not a version, not a future self. Your original self, your untouched self. The self that doesn't need a script to be sacred. And that's the secret. You don't find yourself through action. You remember yourself through stillness. This isn't the end. This is the womb. And you're not breaking down. You're being reborn. You spent your whole life trying to be untouchable. You called it confidence. You called it detachment. You called it strength. But really, it was just escape. 1,000 ways to avoid your own depth. 1,000 masks to keep the world from seeing how much you still hurt. 1,000 performances, hoping someone, anyone, would validate the version of you were pretending to be. But now, something's different. You're tired of the chase, tired of performing, tired of trying to fix a version of you that was never broken, just buried. So you stopped. You stopped apologizing for your fire. You stopped softening your truth for comfort. You stopped betraying your instincts just to be loved. And what happened? The world didn't collapse. You stopped collapsing. You thought the pain would destroy you, but it didn't. It revealed you. You thought surrender would make you weak, but it didn't. It made you whole. And now, you don't need to be untouchable, because you've become unshakable. Not because you don't feel, but because your feelings no longer own you. Not because you don't care, but because you no longer collapse just to keep the peace. Not because you've hardened, but because you've remembered the one thing no one could ever give you: sovereignty. The power that comes when your worth is no longer up for debate. The clarity that lands when your nervous system no longer mistakes chaos for love. The stillness that arrives when you finally stop chasing what was never yours to begin with. You thought being untouchable meant being numb, but that was the lie. The truth? You are the safest when you're the most real. Because when you've integrated the part of you that was once terrified, nothing outside you holds the power to undo you. You're no longer the child begging to be seen. You're no longer the partner shrinking for acceptance. You're no longer the seeker worshiping potential. You've returned, not to perfection, but to presence. And from here, everything changes. Because when you're no longer afraid to be seen, life finally sees you. You've searched everywhere, in partners, in coaches, in books and rituals and endless affirmations. You begged the universe for signs. You chased healing like it was a finish line. You tried to earn the very peace you were born to hold. But now, you're starting to see it. The medicine was never outside of you. The answer was never in the strategy. The permission was never theirs to give. It was always you. You are the medicine, not the one who figured it out. Not the one who did it perfectly. Not the one who finally became lovable, but the one who dared to stay. In the ache, in the silence, in the rage, in the unbearable longing to be met. You stayed. And that is what changed everything. Because the only thing you ever truly needed was to stop abandoning yourself. To stop leaving your inner child alone in the dark every time life got hard. To stop shaming your tenderness. To stop gaslighting your own intuition just to be liked by people who never learned how to love themselves. You've spent years thinking you were broken. But what if your symptoms were sacred? What if the anxiety was your truth, trying to scream through suppression? What if the sadness was your soul mourning your own disconnection? What if the breakdown was the body's rebellion against the lie that you had to be someone else to survive? You don't need fixing. You need remembering, the kind that rewrites your DNA. The kind that says, I was never too much, I was never not enough, I was never meant to be someone else's reflection, I was the remedy all along. But no one taught you that, because no one taught them. So this is where the lineage ends. This is where the forgetting stops. This is where you become the first to choose wholeness over performance. And from that place, every step becomes sacred. Every breath becomes healing. Every word becomes a spell of self-reclamation. You're not here to survive yourself anymore. You're here to embody the truth that you kept buried under everyone else's expectations. Because now you know, the one who cries is not weak. The one who feels is not unstable. The one who stops chasing finally becomes magnetic. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong version of yourself. And now that you've remembered, there's nothing left to search for. Only something to become. This is it. The edge of the old world. The edge of your old self, the moment where the mask can no longer be held. Because the truth has grown too loud to silence. Most people turn back here, right when it starts to feel unfamiliar, right when the identity begins to crumble, right when the soul starts whispering louder than the ego can scream. They call it fear, they call it confusion. They say, maybe I'm not ready, but what they're really saying is, I still don't trust who I am without the pain. Because this is the final threshold. Not of change, of remembrance, where everything you once chased begins to turn toward you. Not because you mastered manifestation, but because you finally became the version of yourself that can hold it. This is the moment where you stop performing, stop proving, stop begging life to give you what you were always meant to birth from within. And in this moment, you choose. You choose to stop identifying with suffering. You choose to stop making your trauma your title. You choose to stop sacrificing your truth for a seat at tables that never had the capacity to see you. You don't need another breakthrough. You need to integrate the one you already had. You don't need a new you. You need to honor the one who's been waiting, patiently, quietly, painfully, while you tried to become everyone else. This is not about healing to get somewhere. This is about returning to the self you abandoned to survive. And if you can stand here, in this sacred fire, in this stillness that doesn't clap for you, in this truth that doesn't ask for applause, then you don't just cross the threshold. You become it, the bridge, the key, the proof that transformation isn't about achieving more. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you to be less. So take one breath, not a step, not a leap, just a breath. Because if you feel this in your bones, you've already begun. There is a moment after the unraveling, after the void, after the silence has scorched every illusion you mistook for identity. And in that moment, there's no more striving, no more becoming, no more proving, only truth, still, silent, unapologetic. You no longer flinch at your own reflection. You no longer chase what abandoned you. You no longer perform for a world that confused noise for worth. Because you remember now, you were never meant to be untouchable. You were meant to be unshaken, not because the world got easier, but because you stopped building your identity around its chaos. Not because pain disappeared, but because you no longer made it your compass. Not because you figured it all out, but because you finally stopped running from yourself. This is not the future self. This is not a healed persona. This is not a brand of spirituality you can post about. This is origin, the real you, the untouched you, the one who knew before the world made you forget. And now that you've returned, there's nothing left to chase, nothing left to become, nothing left to earn, only this breath, only this body, only this being. And from here, everything that once ran from you can finally recognize you, because you no longer beg, you no longer grasp, you no longer barter your truth for belonging. You exist now on your own terms. And the universe, it doesn't just respond, it remembers. It remembers the vibration it's been waiting for. It remembers the light behind your pain. It remembers the frequency of a soul that finally stopped lying to itself. And so do you. So let this be your moment. Let this be your vow. Let this be the breath where everything finally lands. Drop a comment saying, "I am the medicine." Let the algorithm become your altar. Let the comment section become your ritual. Let this video become the moment you finally stopped waiting and started becoming. Subscribe, not for more content. Subscribe as an initiation into sacred shadow work, into the depth most people run from, into the version of you who no longer needs permission to exist. Because this wasn't content, it was a threshold. And if you don't step now, the doorway might close. So decide, not tomorrow, not next week, now, and return to the only thing that was ever real, yourself.